Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we are joined by Rabbi Barry Gelman, who is the rabbi of the Denver Kehillah. He's previously served as the rabbi of United Orthodox Synagogues of Houston, Congregation Shar Shemayim Montreal, Canada, as well as the assistant rabbi at Congregation Kehillah of Jeshurun and the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, both in New York. You've been hopping around the United States over the past, 25 plus years in the rabbinate. He received his bachelor's and master's from Yeshiva University, and he got his smicha from the good old Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, aka Yeshiva Rabbeinu Yitzhak Elchanan, depending on your girsa. And he has notably served with distinction on the executive committee of the Rabbinical Council of America, among many other accomplishments. Now, what we're going to be taking a look at today is a tshuva from the series called B'mar HaBazak, and it is seemingly addressed to a rabbi who was living at the time in Texas, United States of America, which I have my suspicions about who that rabbi might actually be. So, Rabbi Gelman, maybe tell our audience about the shaila that's being raised, your maybe personal connection to it, and a little bit about the sefer that we're actually looking at today.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rabbi Kurtz, for having me. I really enjoy listening to your podcast. I've learned a tremendous amount from you and your guests, and so I wish you continued hatzlacha with this great project. It also may be the Jewish podcast with the best name, so that's also something.
I have to give a shout out to my friend Sam Singer. I post on Facebook, and people gave their suggestions, and he gets royalties every time someone compliments it.
I think I remember that Facebook post. Okay, so first a little bit about the sefer. If you've been in your shul's Beit Midrash library and you've seen a series of bright purple books with a big yellow question mark on the cover, those are the books that we are talking about. They come from a kollel in Yerushalayim called Kollel Eretz Hemdah, which is a religious Zionist kollel. All of the students in the kollel serve in the IDF, and they are already musmachim. They already have their, standard smicha, and now they are starting to be dayanim, to be affirmed, if you will, as religious judges. And they study in this kollel, which is run by Rabbi Moshe Ehrenreich and Rav Yosef Carmel. Back in the day, they had an option to fax. I don't know if your listeners know what that is, to fax shilas to their kollel. And as a way of training their kollel members to answer halachic questions, they would divvy up these questions among their kollel members. The kollel members would write the tshuva, would write the answer to the question. Originally, the questions were approved by Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, as well as Rav Shaul Yisraeli. Now the tshuvot, after they are read, are approved by the two heads of the kollel, Rav Moshe Ehrenreich and Harav Yosef Carmel.
This is already noteworthy. I think this is I'm not an expert. I just host the show on Shilas and Tshuvos. I don't consider myself an expert, but I feel like the general way that a Shilas is asked is someone goes to their rabbi, the rabbi generally goes to the posek, and the posek writes the tshuva himself. But to have a kollel as like a hive mind working on tshuvos, like a factory almost, that seems like something novel and noteworthy.
I think it is novel and noteworthy, and also something novel and noteworthy is they respond quickly. Sometimes when you're dealing with a poskim are busy, but here you get a quick answer, which is part of the reason that I sent my question to them, which I'll get to in a moment. I also happen to have a personal relationship with Rav Yosef Carmel, so I didn't feel like I was sending this question out into the ether. I knew that ultimately, in fact, I sent him the question directly, and then he assigned it to the kollel and then reviewed it and sent it back to me.
Interesting. Can you just tell us a little bit about Rav Carmel? I'm not particularly familiar, as I should be.
Rav Yosef Carmel is one of the founders and the Rosh Kollel of the Kollel Eretz Hemdah. He is a noted author. He has a broad range. He writes on Halacha. He writes on Tanakh. He writes on Lamdus. And he's just a wonderful, wonderful man. People, you're welcome to visit the Kollel next time you're in Yerushalayim. He loves visitors, loves telling people about his kollel, comes to America a few times a year to visit. He did a scholar residence for me more than once in Houston. His English is wonderful, and he's really committed to spreading religious Zionist dayanim, to developing religious Zionist dayanim who could have a rapport and a way to interact and feel something connection to religious Zionists in Israel. It's also notable they also have a Beit Din, a Choshen Mishpat Beit Din, also, which is becoming very, very popular. I don't need this to be a commercial for them, but it's really a wonderful institution.
Wow, wonderful. So, right. So, like you said, you weren't just throwing this question out into the ether. This was a rabbi who you had a relationship with already. So, okay, excellent. So, I take it that you are the shoel of the tshuva that I'm looking at.
I am the shoel. I also wanted to send them the question because I was going to have to provide this answer to the judge, which I'll get to in a moment. And I thought if there was an institution also in Jerusalem behind this answer, it would also help. So I am the shoel. The question is from September 2006. I was visited by an individual who was not a member of my congregation at the time about his aunt's grave. Our synagogue at that point managed and owned 3 different cemeteries. And he said that his aunt was not buried deep enough, and he wanted to disinter her body, her casket, dig the grave deeper, and then rebury her. This was a curious question.
Yeah,
it was uncommon. This was not the pots and pans question.
How deep were they expecting it to be?
So they wanted 6 feet because there's this notion of 6 feet under, and it was only a few feet. They did a probe. They actually took a stick and they stuck it into the grave.
Oh my God.
To see where they hit something solid, presumably the casket. And it was not as deep as other graves may be. And they wanted it dug deeper. Now, it seemed like a strange question. So I started asking around about the family. And it turned out that this family was engaged in an interfamilial dispute about Yerusha, about inheritance, about money left behind. And there were lawsuits back and forth between the family. And this was one of them. Half the family wanted this, half the family did not want this.
You're just being sucked into this maelstrom.
Yeah. And it seemed that maybe also there was an attempt to spend the money left by the deceased instead of letting the other people have it. That's the story I got from some old-time community insiders.
So it wasn't just like someone approached and said, I want to know the das Torah of the Rav. Is it possible for Kavod Hameis to dig it deeper? There seems to be some ulterior motives behind this.
Yes, and when I told the person who came to see me, first I said, I don't think I'm going to do this based on halachic grounds. He then proceeded to offer the shul a large donation.
That's how it always goes.
Sounded a little bit like a bribe, but nevertheless, I still said that I was uncomfortable doing this, and I'm very sorry. I don't think that this is something we're going to be able to do. I thought the matter was at rest then, but shortly afterwards, I received a note from a lawyer that they wanted to depose me on this because they wanted to take the shul to court to force us to allow for this disinterment.
Wow. So now you're being not just pulled into a family dispute, but into a legal dispute.
It becomes a legal dispute, and they decide that it would be a good idea to depose me on Erev Rosh Hashanah.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a little bit of a busy time for rabbis.
Talk about Yom HaDin, right?
Right, that's true. So luckily, the shul's lawyer was a wonderful person who told me that she would respond and that we'll do the deposition. But after an hour and a half or 2 hours, I'm going to instruct Rabbi Gelman to leave. It is the eve of the new year, a very busy time. And so, in fact, we met in the synagogue. They asked me my opinion. I gave them my opinion, which I'll share from the tshuva in a few minutes. And exactly, 2 hours into this deposition, our lawyer basically clopped on the table and said, "This deposition is over. As I told you it would be. Rabbi Gelman, please leave." And so I left, and then ultimately a court date was set. What's interesting about this court date is while the synagogue was in Harris County, which is where most of the Jews live, the cemetery was in Fort Bend County, where there are very few Jews. And so when I entered into this courtroom to talk to the judge, this was probably the first time he had ever had any conversation, certainly with a kippah-wearing Jew, certainly with an Orthodox rabbi, and it led for some very interesting conversation.
Wow.
So what I can do is I can sort of walk through how that trial went.
I think what would be interesting is, and I think there's like two elements happening side by side. There's the legal system that's being imposed upon you. And I'm also wondering, there seemed to be a halachic question that internally you wanted to address, which was the shaila sent to Eretz Hemdah. So I'm curious, you could choose which one you want to do first, the halachic analysis and then also the broader story taking place in the court system.
So let's do the halacha analysis, and then I could sprinkle in the interesting elements from the actual trial, not trial, the actual hearing in court.
Sure.
So I sent this question where I mentioned that unfortunately I've been called to a court hearing about whether or not we can disinter this woman and dig her body deeper. And my understanding is that this is not grounds for such a thing. Can you please explain if I'm right or wrong? And so the tshuva comes back listing the reasons that do in fact allow for disinterment, as noted in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeya, Shin Samach Gimel Aleph, which is 363, the first paragraph in that section, where in the tshuva and the Shulchan Aruch it notes that disinterment is permitted for the following reason: to move the person to a family kever, to a family plot called kever avotav, to move the body to Israel, if the body was originally buried on condition to be moved later, and if the kever is not protected. And the Shulchan Aruch notes a few elements of what that could mean. It could mean that there's a fear of grave robbers, and it could also mean that there's water in the grave. And here is where the hearing comes in, because none of the first three apply. There was no intention to move the person to Israel. There was no intention to move them to a family grave, and there was no precondition when they were buried to be moved. So the opposing lawyer asked me, well, is this a safe cemetery? And I said, for dead people? Meaning the opposing counsel wanted me to say that it's dangerous and maybe there's grave robbers. And I said, there are no grave robbers. And then here's a really interesting twist. This woman was the only woman in that cemetery who was buried in a concrete vault.
Whoa.
I don't know if the listeners are familiar with this, that in some places, let's say New Orleans, places that are below sea level, often the graves are unstable, and so they have to be lined with a concrete vault. Moshe Feinstein has tshuva about this, whether or not that's permissible. I'm not sure how it happened. It was way before my time, but she was in a concrete vault. So for grave robbers to steal this woman's body, they would need to bring in a tractor to lift off a concrete, probably like a 3-foot by 6-foot concrete cover on the vault in order to steal her body. So
her grave is as well protected as it's going to get. She's, I guess, safe down there.
Yes, she was certainly safe. So in the case of it being Eino Mishtamer in terms of grave robbers, the judge was convinced that that was not an issue. And then the second issue, the lawyer said, well, isn't there water in the grave, Rabbi? Now, the truth is, in many graves in Houston, I did many funerals, there was water in the grave. I said to the lawyer, I said, I don't know, but I will tell you that digging her deeper in Houston is only going to make that worse.
Right.
Right? Because if there's water now, there's certainly going to be water if we dig 3 feet deeper, which is actually noted in the footnote in the tshuva itself. And the judge sort of looked at me with sort of like a little bit of a smile and said, A fair point, Rabbi. That does not seem to be grounds either. It's also interesting to note from a halachic perspective, there is a machloket what this means. Some say the water has to be visible on the surface of the grave in order to be a big enough bizayon to move the deceased, and some say even if there's water in the grave, that's grounds. But in this case, again, it was mute because digging the body deeper was only going to make the issue of water worse.
Right. The grave is as well as protected as it's going to be.
Correct. And again, digging it deeper would mean there's more water. So at this point, I sort of turned to the judge and said, we've run out of religio-legal allowances.
I'm just curious also if I could interject. The notion of 6 feet under, do we have a sense of what the origin of that is, that notion?
I don't have a sense of that, but I do know, based on the tshuva that was sent to me, that halachically there is no depth requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Minhag Yerushalayim is to bury people at about 4.5 feet deep, and I think it's the Chazon Ish notes something about. The Gesher Achayim notes something about 10 tfachim, which is like 33, maybe 32, 33 inches.
That's not 6 feet.
Very deep at all. And all of this is al pi minhag, which is noted in the tshuva. This is customary, not requirement. And just one other note, the Gemara from time to time talks about something called a beit hapras, which is a field that when you plow, you find the bones of dead bodies. So presumably, if all you're doing is plowing and you find the bones of dead bodies, those bodies must not have been buried very deep.
That's a great point.
If just plowing the field reveals them to the surface. So there was nothing to go on in terms of saying, well, this is what halacha requires. And she certainly was deeper than 10 tfachim.
Right. It's interesting the kind of things that are not halachic that people treat with the gravity of halacha.
Right.
So, it's interesting. At the end of the tshuva, I see that whoever responded to, did you say you knew who was actually responding to the tshuva?
I don't know. No.
Oh, so whoever it was, he says, if the family members still feel something needs to be done, you could just pile some more earth on top of the kever, and you'll get to the sheer 6 feet that they have.
So that, in fact, happened that, by the way, in the footnote said that was Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg's idea after he read through the tshuva. And so at the trial, the judge, first of all, I had a photocopy of the page of the Shulchan Aruch with me, and the judge actually asked if he could keep it.
Oh,
he was really moved by the whole religious principle of the idea and kavod hamet, respect for the deceased.
I'm sure he probably also appreciated it. I think there's like a misnomer of what religion is. I think when people discover, especially those in the legal field, that Judaism operates on legal-like principles and halacha, I think that's something that they find fascinating, that has the same rigor or maybe more so than what you find in the general legal system.
Yeah, so I think somewhere in the in the Fort Bend County Court records, there's a copy of Shin Samach Gimel of Yerodea and this tshuva from Kol Eretz Hemdah. In any case, the judge turned to me and said, "Well, Rabbi, do you have a solution?" I said, "I do. Let's build a concrete barrier around the grave and fill it with earth, which will then make it deep enough, satisfying the family needs." And the judge thought that was a great idea. And then the family, who was sort of suing the congregation, had a little huddle at their desk, and they offered an alternative solution. They said, what about a marble slab put on top of the grave, which you often see in graves? And my lawyer and the judge asked me if I was comfortable with that. And I said, sure, that's a wonderful solution. And the judge sort of clocked with his gavel and said, okay, anyone have any other questions, any other concerns? If not, case dismissed. With this is the solution. We're not going to force the congregation to disinter. The woman, I have to say, low key, I was hoping we would lose because I was really looking forward to like a Supreme Court case.
Ah,
But anyway, we won, and the solution was the marble slab on top of the grave. That was sort of the end of the case. When I walked out of the courtroom, I was met at the elevator with TV cameras. The family that was suing the congregation invited the press to sort of put pressure on us to succumb to their demand. And a family member was out there screaming, "My aunt is going to be floating down the street next time there's a flood because of this ruling and this rabbi." And the reporter sort of sticks a microphone in my face and asks me if I have any comments. And sort of out of nowhere, my lawyer shows up and she says, "Rabbi Gelman has said all he wanted to say in the court. Thank you." And she pushes me into the elevator. And we go downstairs to the parking lot and back home. So that was the end of the case, and that is those are the essential elements. Those are the essential elements of the tshuva. Which also note that sometimes, even if someone is buried lo kedin, let's say without shrouds, right, not in keeping with traditional halacha, that after the fact, we would not disinter the person. So the other point in the tshuva was made that even if there was some halachic requirement of depth, this b'di'ev, like after the fact, we would not have grounds to disinter.
right. I still remember when I was a rabbinic intern. So Rabbi Eli Weissman was my mentor, Young Israel Plainview, and he said, funerals are they're not as high stakes as weddings. Weddings, you mess up yichus, there can be mamzerus issues, but in the end of the day, like if the person's buried, I guess, I don't know, 6 feet under, maybe not even 6 feet under,
Right.
the job has been done. Whether you said a certain prayer or not, I mean, obviously we want to do it the best way possible, but b'di'evad, generally we don't need to go back and do anything. So this is like a great story, and I think this is remarkable. Because you are the Shoel, so you could give us a lot of background to the tshuva. I think the tshuvas b'mar HaBazak are just fascinating to know about. So for our listeners who are not yet familiar, it's something good to know about, and it's just interesting the confluence of the halachic issue you're dealing with on the religious side, but then also how that interacted with the legal system, the family dynamics. There's so many things coming in. And I think that's important also when we look at shilas. Many times we'll just see a shilah on paper, but there could always be so much more behind it that we wouldn't be privy to if we didn't bring the show on to actually give us the behind the scenes look. So is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Just a few short points. First of all, just the methodology of Eretz Hemdah, the HaBazak. The tshuvot are written in a very interesting style. The answers are usually quite short, a paragraph or two, and then below the line there are lots of footnotes. So for someone who is not familiar with a lot of rabbinic texts, and they want to see interesting questions and answers in modern Hebrew without a lot of halacha jargon, it's a great sefer to learn. And for those who want to go more in depth, then you have all the footnotes, which give you all of the Gemarot, the Rishonim, the Achronim, the Tshuvot. So it's really a great sefer in that
It's
sense.
really like a good like cheating. I don't know, cheating is like the wrong word, but if you're a rabbi and you need like a good between Mincha Marav or a Shal Shudas thing for 10 minutes or so, like you said, you have the main text and you have the footnotes for more analysis. It's a really great sefer to use for that.
Indeed. I'll also say that besides the halachic and the legal elements of this case, there's also a pastoral element of this case. Now, the family came in hot, right? They came in with threats and with maybe a bribe. And so there wasn't a lot of room for pastoral guidance here. But in another situation, it would have been, oh my goodness, my mother, I don't think she's buried deep enough. This is so distressing for me. Rabbi, what am I supposed to do? So I didn't do that. And I didn't have that. And maybe I should have turned it more into a pastoral situation. Looking back, maybe I would have I could have done that,
But I
but
think they didn't, they approached in a confrontational manner. They didn't come to you as the clergy for guidance. But I'm sure
that's
you would have
true.
been more than well prepared to dispense that if they were, there needs to be consent on their end. They have to see you as a guiding figure.
Right. Like I said, they came in a little aggressive, but in other situations, for listeners and in similar situations, this is not just, as we know, there's almost nothing that's just a halachic issue.
Mhm.
There's almost always a pastoral issue, which we have to keep in mind. Even as like halacha geeks, we want to like dive right into the poskim. We have to remember the other part of our job. And in terms of yeah, so those are just some other thoughts that I had about the this particular case.
Wonderful. And so I think that's like a really good note to end on, which is, and this is part of why I love the Shalos Chuvos, obviously the halachic geeking out, but also that there are real human elements. And we would hope if there were to, Chas v'shalom, be another iteration of this, I know you would be more than well prepared. And I hope myself as well, that we're not here just to dispense the halachic advice, but to help the family holistically with what they need. And, God willing, we'll be there to support anyone who needs us in those
Yeah.
cases.
And there's also like for me, it was great to actually be a shoel and get a written tshuva back. It's not so common. And so, if you know someone, if you're a rabbi and you have a rabbi, getting written tshuvot back
It's something that posterity,
is
God
great.
willing, will look at and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, my grandfather asked this
Yeah,
shilots." They'll look at
right.
it with pride one day. Here,
I hope so.
all right. Well, Shkoyach Rabbi Gelman, thank you so much for sharing this story, this personal story with us, and for introducing us to B'mar HaBazak. I just want to give you a bracha for continued Hatzlacha and all the amazing things you're doing in Denver, and looking forward to following your scholarship and everything that you're sharing with us.
Amen. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
All right, take care.